Hello everyone, and welcome to session 2, workshop number 8. This workshop is going to be all about facilitating inquiry research with primary age students. And as with all the other presentations, if you would like to participate by asking questions or making some comments, you can at #EdCollabGathering, #8, and you can see that directly below my name. So with that said, I'd like to kick off our presentation today. And I'd like to introduce two great educators, both Shawna Coppola and Emily Spear. So, you're up.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. My name is Shawna Coppola, and I'm presenting today with my colleague, Emily Spear, and we're going to be talking to you today about doing inquiry research with primary age students. But what we talk about today can be extended to all age levels, so don't fear if you teach older students. We have lessons that we've learned that will extend far beyond the group of children that we taught. And again, I want to thank you for being here with us at our session. We know on the Seacoast area anyway, it's a gorgeous day, and so you, our heroes, are here with us, and we really, really do appreciate that. So I've been teaching for over 15 years, and I currently teach at Rollinsford Grade School in Rollinsford, New Hampshire. I'm a literacy specialist, and I work with students and teachers K to 6. And with me today is Emily Spear. She's been teaching for over 25 years and currently teaches in a multi-age first and second grade classroom. So one of the things that we want to start with is we want to have you see why we actually started collaborating together. So here's some background information. Why inquiry? Well, several years ago, our school, Rollinsford Grade School, began moving toward a more inquiry-related mode of teaching and learning. And one of the reasons we did that, as many of you know, because I know that some of the presentations today have talked a lot about inquiry. Inquiry research and inquiry learning with students just really offers so much more in the way of engagement with students. It offers them the chance to have much more voice and choice in their learning, and we really believe in it. We think it's just a wonderful way to learn, and we think that it's just a way for us teachers to learn as well, so we extend that to our learning as well. Now, when we started moving to this inquiry-based teaching and learning, of course, it's always challenging. And particularly, it felt very challenging for the teachers who worked with our youngest students. Because when we think of traditional research, we tend to think of what we did in school, which was we had a topic that we either chose or was chosen for us. We get some text, like encyclopedia entries and other books from the library, and we write down notes, and then we kind of regurgitate it out what we've learned. And we know that there are other ways to read text, and that's what we teach students. But we still were trying to figure out how to do this kind of independent inquiry research with our youngest students who are just beginning readers. So that's sort of how we started collaborating, and Emily and I decided that it would be really fun to do this inquiry work with her students together so that we could learn together. And so I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to explain how the first unit that we're going to talk to you about came about, because throughout the presentation we're going to be talking to you about two different inquiry units that we did with her first and second grade students. One actually took us from October until February, which sounds like a long time, and it is, but time is a big, big, important issue here. And then the second one, which we're going to refer to a little bit, took from March until about late May. We're mostly going to talk about the first unit, but we will be referring to the second inquiry unit as well. So Emily, can you just talk a little bit about how the first unit came about?
Sure. The first year we started the inquiry learning, I feel like my colleagues and I at this grade level stumbled through it. We couldn't find the answers, and people weren't sure how to give us ideas of how to do it with these younger students. So the second year I was determined to make it work and be exciting for the students. And I was racking my brain of how can I do this, when one day I picked up a book, Fly Guy Presents book, which is kind of a hybrid nonfiction book from the Fly Guy series. And I started reading it to the class, not with inquiry in mind. As I was reading it, students were getting excited about all the text features and author choices they noticed in this book, and were pointing them all out. And this kind of light bulb went off in my head that what if, and I kind of said to the students right then and there, what if you got to make a book like this Fly Guy Presents on anything that you're interested in? And right then and there, I ran to Shawna and said, I think this could be our inquiry unit. And then the next part was starting to think of what could they do. They could put all those text features in with whatever their topic was.
Exactly. And I actually remember you, like this, when she said she ran to me, she literally ran to me. And we were like, oh my gosh, this would be great. So we, of course, thought, as with most things that we do, we really try to use our kid watching skills and really look at what are their behaviors and what are their words telling us is the natural next step for curriculum. And so this is a perfect way to start a new inquiry unit because of their enthusiasm with the Fly Guy Presents books. So once we decided we were going to collaborate together and this was what we were going to do, the first stage that we came across in this work, and as someone who's done inquiry since I was actually an intern over 15 years ago, this is how I always begin, and that is with identifying wonders. So I'm going to have Emily just talk a little bit about how we generated some wonders and questions that the kids had about just various topics that they could potentially create an informational text in the manner of Fly Guy Presents on, and also how we modeled our own questions and wonders.
So when I brought it up to the students after of, all right, what would you like to learn about? I had them work in small groups and make lists, which you see on the screen. They just made lists and lists of anything they were interested and wanted to know more about. And then we came together and I started compiling their lists when they told them to me on the smartboard. And we probably filled 5 pages on the smartboard of questions. Of course, at first they started out just like, I want to know about dogs or cats. And then the longer we did it, again, time being that essence to this whole inquiry study, but we spent about 2 weeks digging deeper of really what would you want to learn. And even from those questions, if they said, I want to learn about the ocean or, what's in the ocean, it got deeper. Oh, why are there currents? And how does the moon affect the ocean? And what lives in the ocean? And it just grew from there. And once we did that for a few weeks, then with all those pages, I asked the students individually if they could write down their top 3 favorite interests that we had brainstormed. And from that, I knew that we couldn't handle 14 different topics going on in the classroom, just for management-wise. And luckily, of all the interests that they wrote down on their 3 interests, we were able to call 5 groups, like dogs and space, reptiles, which made it much more manageable. So everyone got at least one of their top choices.
Yeah, and that how you said how we were worried a little bit about management, but just everything that we talk about today really just ended up working for us and for our kids. And one of the things we want to emphasize is that this is not a blueprint for how to do this with every group of children that you're working with, but it really is something that worked for us, and we were really excited about it, and so we wanted to share it with you. So just keep that in mind as we keep going with the presentation. So students, we had identified these big topics that students were interested in, and they really were big. As Emily said, we had a group that was interested in dogs, we had a group that was interested in reptiles, another one was interested in space and Earth. They weren't quite sure what aspect of that they wanted to look at. And so once they had their big topics, we moved on to stage 2, which continued to have them generate questions and wonders about their big topics, of course. And what happened with this stage is we brought in all sorts of digital and non-digital resources for them to just immerse themselves in and explore. And so taking a page from our good friend Kathy Collins's work, we created these topic-based book bins. So we had a book bin for space, we had a book bin for dogs, and so on and so forth, that they just explored. We reminded them of all the different ways that we can read texts, because of course many of these texts were books that had many, many tricky words that were beyond the reading level of most of our students. And so we also talked a lot about how do we read images, and what kind of questions can be generated from the things that you're seeing in the books. We also used a variety of non-digital texts as well, and one of the things that our media specialist, Caroline Carroll, introduced us to, which was absolutely fabulous, is Symbaloo. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But first, Emily's going to talk about how, based on their big topic, how students actually started, what did they do with those questions, and what did they do with the information that they were gaining from these digital and non-digital texts?
So students, as they were looking through books and watching videos on their topics, they would just big pieces of paper write down anything that they were interested in. And they were just gathering more questions and more information about their topics. And as Shawna said, this was completely authentic to Shawna and I. We weren't sure, we knew the end product we wanted them to create, but we weren't sure how we were going to get there. So they just kept writing down all their information and reflecting on it and talking with each other about it.
Right. They the time to talk and reflect was really, really important. And one of the other things that we talked to them a lot about was the importance of, I'm just going to move a couple of slides forward and then I'll go back, the importance of using both text, written text, and of doodles. So big shout out to Sunny Brown, who wrote the Doodle Revolution that I know many of you might be familiar with. This changed everything for me as an educator. I was aware that visual text was becoming more and more important. I was aware that we were becoming less committed to talking about visual literacy, especially the older kids got. And so one of the things we taught kids to do, our students, is not only to write down what you can write in words if you are having a question or you're finding a fact that's really interesting, but also to doodle it and to make sure that those doodles were detailed enough so that if someone were to ask you, what's this about, you could tell them. And so they really did do that, which was really nice. Now, just really quickly for some of you who may not be familiar with Symbaloo. So Symbaloo is basically a way to bookmark a bunch of sites that you want to bookmark and have them all in one place. And this is just an absolute lifesaver, and it was for us with both units that we did with students. You can see here that we have a bunch of different websites bookmarked here that students can access directly through the Symbaloo page. We have a bunch about space and reptiles and dogs and cats and all kinds of things. And the great thing about Symbaloo is that even though students are still making decisions about what sites would be appropriate for them or have interesting information that they want to use, they're still making those decisions, but they're doing it in a much smaller room, which is really nice. And you can avoid certain things that tend to happen when we have access to the entire internet when you use Symbaloo, so that's always good as well. Emily, did you want to talk a little bit about the other digital stuff that we did, like with the iPads at all? Because I don't remember if it was you or someone with the text-to-speech, that feature that we discovered.
Some of the kids would kind of outgrow Symbaloo as their research went on, and then we would have to go out onto the internet. And sometimes it would be finding articles that depended on what the students needed to find out about their topic. So sometimes we'd find articles about it, and of course most of them were above, even if we typed in for kids, were above the first and second grade reading level. So with the help of our media specialist and some other colleagues, we found that, probably all of you know this, but I didn't, that that you could have the iPad read to you by highlighting it, and so
Actually, I think
and
I
laptops
think it
too.
was one of our colleagues who figured that out. Wasn't it Cheryl that
I
figured
think
that
it
out?
was.
She's so shout out to Cheryl. She's like that was another game changer for us.
It certainly was. So kids were able to, we taught them how to listen to the articles on the iPad or the laptop that they were using if they needed to get some certain information that they had decided was important about their topic. That was, and of course it sounds kind of funny because it's kind of robot speech almost, but it was still another way that you didn't have to sit by a student and read everything to them. They could be independent with it.
Exactly. And that was one of our goals too, is to allow them to have that agency and independence. That was really important to us. And I think sometimes with the younger students, we tend to be a little bit more kind of over their shoulder, like, what are you doing? Can I read that for you? Can I write that for you? And we really are committed to, just helping students gain independence that is developmentally appropriate for that one student at the time, but really to help honor their agency, and we feel that it absolutely helps them become much more engaged. And so during this immersion process, as we said, students were continuing to they were continuing to come up with questions that they had and wonders that they had. They were writing down interesting facts, and through these kind of broad notes, their kind of mini or focus topics were decided. And so we moved, so that, for example, I think, Emily, we had one student who was in the reptile group, and he ended up saying, I really want to study snakes and their enemies. And that was his kind of like focus. And then there was another one in the reptile group who said, I want to compare crocodiles and alligators and make my informational text about that. So that's kind of how they started narrowing their big topics into their focus topics. And at that point, it was time to start gathering information about their focus topics. And so we moved on to stage 3, and Emily's going to talk a little bit more about this part, but and as far as what the support staff did for this part, because this was a huge part of this inquiry work, was the gathering info stage. One of the things that was another game changer, so we should call this game changers with inquiry research, but that was sticky notes. And I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna go back, but so you can see
4 by 6 too.
Yeah, 4 by 6 sticky notes. They were big enough so that it would hold these students' big writing and their doodles if they wanted to, but it was also, we found that the sticky notes were so great because, first of all, what kid doesn't like sticky notes? And number 2, they could be organized so much more easily when the facts were on a sticky note. And so we found that to be really helpful. Throughout this gathering info stage, again with the kid watching, we let the kids tell us through their actions, their behaviors, their questions, what kind of mini lessons they needed for us to give them. And so we would give them mini lessons on how to come up with keywords to type into Google. And actually, we at first we had them type in their own keyword searches, and then came across a little bit of trouble with something that happened with that because on the iPads we didn't have the firewalls that we do on the laptops, which is a really good thing in many ways. So what we ended up doing was we ended up having them tell an adult in the room what keywords or key phrase they wanted us to type into Google. And so there was a lot of synthesizing that they had to do. There was a lot of thinking about, we talked to them about, you can't just type in a whole big question because you're not going to get as many good resources as you would if you had a few keywords. And we also told them about adding kind of kids to the end of their key phrase so that it would tend to bring them more resources that were, kid-friendly. And again, with the doodling and text, that was just another thing that we kept telling them, don't forget, you're coming across a word that is too tricky for you, maybe you can try to doodle it and, you know, make sure you understand what it's saying. Now, throughout this time, Emily is she's gonna talk to you a little bit about the support staff and what they did and what we did to have more help, because it was obviously really difficult to manage all of the groups at once. So Emily, you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Also, Shawna and I, during this whole process, we were modeling as well. We had picked the big topic of pollution and then decided our mini topic, as we started to show the kids how we would research, was pollution around the world. So we were doing this right with them. We were like a microsecond ahead of them, but barely, to decide what needed to come next. So for support staff, one crucial thing, Shawna and I could not have done this by ourselves. We had, I used to put out in the beginning of the week a plea, an email to the whole staff that I would give the times that we were going to be doing this during the week, and they were big chunks of time. They were an hour to an hour and a half chunks of time. So the kids knew there was no rush in this. So any staff member that was free would come in and help us. They would, and at times we would look around, and every group or individual student, depending how they decided to work, would have an adult near them at times, which was fantastic, especially during this early research time of taking notes, something that was brand new for these students. The hard part was that Shawna and I didn't quite know how to manage this or have the time to, as support staff walked in, to tell them what we needed them to do or how to help students. So sometimes support staff would end up taking the notes for them or having them write it down word for word. And the problem with that was, as you probably know, is that students would go back a day or two later and have no idea what that note meant. So that was something that we had to work through, and we ended up in our later inquiry unit of creating a page on Google Docs that was a living page where we would put who was working on what they needed help with, where they were in the process. So if support staff walked in, they could just look at the laptop that was up, our teacher laptop, and know how to help whoever they went to work with, which was really good. And we wanted support staff to more empower the students than enable them by doing too much for them. That was really crucial. I think that was it.
Yeah, so I mean, and I love how you said we were just looking to empower the students and not enable them. And I think that oftentimes with every best intention, we tend to enable students and use too many scaffolds, and we don't allow them the opportunity to gain independence with their work. And so this was a huge learning experience for us and for the wonderful support staff who would devote any spare moment that they had to come in and help us. So we really appreciated that, but it was a really big aha moment for us as well. So then continuing on with the gathering of information, let me show you. So there was a point, and Emily's going to speak to this too, that there was a point where we realized, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, that we were wondering, we would like kind of stand in areas of the room at different times together and look around, and we'd be like, do they really understand what they're writing down? And because there were some students who, you know, they had these wonderful notes, but we kind of suspected that they might not get exactly what they had written down, that they might just be kind of copying word for word what they were seeing. And so we kind of did a little timeout and did a couple of, well, we had some discussion about, you know, do you truly understand the notes that you're taking? And we kind of developed this activity to ensure that they did. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, Emily?
Sure. So once they'd collected quite a few sticky notes of facts, we paired the students and had them read them. I think they had to read to several people. They would read their sticky notes, and if it didn't make sense to the partner, they would put a question mark, or if it didn't make sense to them, they would put a question mark. If it made sense to both of them, they'd put a check mark on it, as you can see on some of the sticky notes. If there was a question mark, they could either decide they needed to go back and research a little bit more on that and add to it, or if it completely didn't make sense or they felt like it didn't make sense to the project anymore, the beauty of the sticky note, again, they could just rip it off and throw it away and say, I don't think I need that in my presentation. So that check-in with peers was really important to help them organize their information. And it also, the first book we did, again, it was a book, so they started organizing their sticky notes in, oh, that's coming up.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So just that whole conversation about, if you don't understand what you wrote, or if you're talking to a group about your notes and they're like, okay, so what does that mean? And you're just kind of like, or there's like crickets going on, then you know what? If you can either do more research on that and figure it out, or this is the great thing with sticky notes. You can take it off and be done with it. And I feel like that was really empowering for kids. Mm-hmm. And we were a little scared. I was a little scared that, kids would just be like, okay, well, I'm going to just do it over. And that didn't happen. It was just a few here and there that kids were like, you know what? Don't really know what I was writing here or what I doodled here, and I can't really explain it, so I'm just going to put it aside for now or recycle it, and I'm going to move on with my research. So it was really nice. So once they had gathered, of course, we're moving quickly through this because we have a time limit, but this, of course, took so much time. And one of the things that we want to emphasize is, again, we would, in the midst of facilitating, these groups and talking with them and conferring and asking them what they needed next, we would stand there and be just in awe at the stamina that these students had and the engagement that we saw. I mean, I think I took like a half a dozen panorama shots of your classroom one day, because it wasn't just that students had stamina between October and February, but they would have stamina for 45 minutes, 50 minutes at a time, and they were always engaged. I mean, we had no issues that were behavior related. They were just, we would shut the lights off to signal, oh, it's time to start picking up because you have to actually eat. And we would get all these groans and go, oh, when can we come back? And, oh, well, we're not going to do this today because Mrs. Coppola is not in today, so we're going to wait. Oh, when are we going to do it again? It was just like, we were continually astonished by that. And it was
really, like a room full of, it was almost like everyone was a peer and everyone was a researcher, and it didn't feel like student and teacher. It was a pretty amazing dynamic that was created.
It was awesome. So, so then after they had gathered all their information, or, of course there were moments when they would need to continue to gather information during this next stage of organizing their information, but once they had done that, then it was time to move on to organizing their information.
So in this, the slide on the left where there are boxes, that was two-sided, and so students were creating a book, either a paper book or a digital book on the iPads with Book Creator. And so students need to lay out their Post-its so that it read like a book. And they'd put them on there and they'd read it, but then they could move those Post-its if something needed to come before or didn't make sense together. So that was a great organizational tool for them. The second one, students had much more choice in the way they presented their information, so it could have been a calendar or a sculpture or a PowerPoint, but students took that organization that they'd learned by making the book, and the student that's shown on the right, he was making something about sloths, and just started organizing authentically his Post-its before he put them into a poster and a sculpture, and realized that, oh, some of these facts are about two-toed sloths, and some are about three-toed, and some of them are about both.
Right. Yeah, so as Emily said, the first time around there was a product in mind from the very beginning, that's informational text, and so we did have a way to help them organize using that kind of that Post-it note storyboard. But the second time, we found that students were organizing it independently, and for those who weren't, we would use someone like Everett, who did the sloths. We would use his example as, here's one way that you could organize your information. And again, just our kid watching was just on point. It was on fleek during these two sessions, these two units, because without that, we wouldn't know where to go, or we'd have a set plan in mind, but it might not be what students really needed or what they really wanted. So it was really important to listen to them and to use them to help motivate each other by sharing what they were discovering and how they were learning how to do certain things like organize notes. So then, let's see, I just want to make sure I'm on our schedule here. Okay, so then once they had organized their notes and had read, for this first unit, they had read through and kind of determined that they were able to organize their stickies so that it was starting to make sense, thinking about how their informational text was going to read to a reader. Then it was time to actually share the learning and create these texts. So I'm going to show you our slide for that. So again, for each round of inquiry, this stage was different, but for each round, our guiding questions were the same. So one question is, what do you want people to know about your topic? Yes, you might have already decided months ago, as it turned out, that you were going to teach your readers about training a puppy. But what specifically do you want them to know about training a puppy? And then how do you want to tell them about it? Obviously, there was more choice the second time around during our second unit because we didn't have an end product in mind. But even in the first inquiry unit, they could choose to either create a digital informational book through the wonderful app Book Creator, which is like the best thing ever, or they could use they could make a paper book in a more traditional way. So they had choice in that as well. So what do you want people to know about your topic? How do you want to tell them about it? And what decisions will you make in creating this product? And again, for the sole purpose of sharing your learning with an audience. So for the first rounds, the first round of inquiry, their decisions were very largely based off of the noticings that they had of our mentor text, which was the Fly Guy Presents books. That was really important. And we even had, we would chart the decisions and talk about, which decisions are you going to make today? You can make decisions about background, or you can make decisions about whether you're going to have a character like Fly Guy. But we also had discussions about how we were going to share our learning, and Emily's just going to talk a little bit about the different ways that they did end up ultimately sharing their learning.
So in December, our school had a mini showcase as compared to our big showcase we have at the end of the year, where every classroom students presented some kind of inquiry learning they've been doing so far. Well, our classroom was the only classroom that we were still in the midst of it. We did not have a final product, and at first the kids and I were nervous about doing that because we'd go to classrooms and it was all products. And then we decided to embrace it, and we decided how we were going to tell those students, kind of like we are telling you today, how we were going to tell the incoming students or adults that walked into our classroom what we've been doing over the past 3 or 4 months. And it was an incredible time for the kids to realize how much they had done. They were so knowledgeable. They were able to share all the information about their facts and their Post-it notes and where they were in the process. They were just so empowered by the whole thing. It was very motivating. That was one way we shared. Another way was in the beginning of each day, when we kind of do a status of the class, where is everybody before you go off and work, we would pull students up and have them share where they were in their work. And that was motivating almost more than our mini lessons to the kids of, wow, I didn't realize you could do that. Or one person started adding sound text into their book creator, and another student said, wow, I didn't know that. That would motivate other students to try things that these students were sharing. So that was very powerful, and again, just empowering the students, and it wasn't just coming from us. And then at the end, we did have the final student showcase of their products in February, where again, their interest did not wane at all during the whole process. And it was so, we had some adults come in that were not related to the school, just townspeople, and they could not believe the conversations that our students could have with them about the process and their learning and the decisions they made. They were just amazed that 6- and 7-year-olds could talk to them about this process and what they've gotten out of it. They could be presenting today, not us.
Oh my gosh, I know. How dumb are we to not? I mean, part would have totally presented. And he would have been so adorable. You guys would all be just in love with them. But yeah, so the sharing was really, like Emily said, it was, everyone's kind of panicked during this mini showcase that, oh my gosh, well, we're not finished and everybody else is finished. And I really think that, again, the idea of, you don't have to, when you're sharing your learning, you don't have to always share a product, that the process is just as important, if not more important, than the product is. And that was a really good moment for us to kind of have them realize that and be proud of that. I want to show you just a few of the decisions that were made during this sharing of the learning. So on the left, you can see we have our student, Adele, had decided that she was going to create her book in Book Creator, and here she's just deciding on the background for one of her pages. One of the decisions they had to make, because in the Fly Guy Presents books, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, some of the backgrounds in those pages are photographs, and some are notebook pages, and some are just straight color in the background. And so they had to decide, am I going to have a different background for every page? Am I going to keep it consistent across pages? And we really left it up to them to decide what would be best for their audience and what would look the best. Of course, we guided them along the way, but we really wanted it to be independent decisions that they were making. And then on the right-hand side, we have Everett, and he, as Emily mentioned, he decided to create a sculpture during the second round of inquiry where we were studying the rainforest. He wanted to create a sculpture that would show how sloths are in their habitat. And so here he is making a decision about whether this tree that we had found outside was going to, how he was going to be able to hold it up, if it was going to be sufficient enough to hold on to his sloths that he was going to sculpt out of clay, and so on and so forth. So decisions really, focusing on that with the sharing of the learning really helped with honoring student agency. And I think I stepped on you a little bit, Emily, here. I'm sorry.
Because of time, that's okay. I think we should go on to the next slide.
Okay.
You did it perfectly.
Okay, so let me show the next slide. So again, one of the other decisions on the left, you can see that this student was deciding, am I going to have a character sort of present my information in my book, just like the Fly Guy Presents books have Fly Guy? And so this person had created two different characters that were possibilities. One is Space Kitty on the left, and one is UFO Girl on the right. And I think they ultimately decided on Space Kitty for that. And then on the right, just an example that Emily mentioned much earlier in our presentation about the decisions students were making about topics. So we had someone who, of the three big topics he was considering, one was hunting and dogs, one was to learn about moose, and one was learning about coyotes. And so just, again, the importance of decision making, helping them become as independent and engaged in their work as possible. So ultimately, these are just some examples of pages of the work that students created. Here is a cover of a book called Snakes and Their Enemies that Aiden created, and his character is Cobra Kitty, who throughout his book kind of gave information about snakes and their enemies. And we have here our student Ryan decided he wanted to make a paper book about cats. And this page is all about how to stop a cat fight. So he has, step 1, how it starts, step 2, get to it, and step 3, stopping the cat fight. And I wish we could show you all of his work right now, but I'm going to put a plug in for the Kristen McAuliffe Technology Conference in December. We will be presenting on this there as well with our media specialist, Caroline Carroll, and we will bring some of these final products there for you to look at. And then here we have Kira, and she did a book about cats, and this is just one of her pages. Cats can jump between 5 to 7 times as high as their tail. And on many of her pages, she actually had an audio piece to it. So I know we're getting close to question time if we have them, but we wanted to share a little bit about our learning. We definitely feel like there was more that worked with us than didn't work, which was really great. Certainly the collaboration was such a big piece. Using Google Docs to collaborate when one of us wasn't around, because I'm actually only in the school 3 days a week, whereas Emily's there full time. So that really worked well for us. Our conversations where we would just informally assess what was going on, how students were doing, what they needed next. That was really, really important. But we've mentioned a lot of the aha moments, and we have a lot of other further questions and wonders, but Emily was going to just, again, what she talked about with teaching our support staff to help empower kids and not enable them was probably one of the biggest aha moments for both of us. Wouldn't you say, Emily?
I would, and just also to remember that to take the risk and not get ahead of your planning, and to just try to be in that moment with students. And this is not a prescribed way. Shawna and I created this day to day, minute to minute.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call a teacher timeout right in the middle of something,
we'd be like,
so we could
teacher
talk.
timeout.
So really just to let yourself, this is some of the best teaching I've done, and my plan book was not all filled in because of it.
Yeah, so Ryan, do we have any questions? We can't hear you talk. There we go.
Thanks, Shawna.
Yeah.
Thanks for your tech expertise there. No, but everybody's been really complimentary on Twitter, so thank you so much for that presentation. And Shawna, I'd like to commend you for your use of the term "on fleek," which I think has all of us very jealous out here. But I do have just a couple quick questions for you, and feel free, either of you can field them. But first, during this inquiry process, these inquiry projects, how were you able to kind of assess what the students were doing? I mean, obviously you could see the work they were doing, but how did you kind of keep track of the entire classroom, I guess, is what I'm curious about.
Well, we had kind of this, for the second inquiry unit, we had the Google Doc that had a list of all of the students and how their groupings for their pairings, if they were working with someone or working independently, what they were currently working on, and what kinds of things did they need. And one of the things we realized, that we were so into this whole inquiry process, is that we actually sort of forgot to formally assess our students on these projects. And I think that's kind of a good thing, actually, because it was more about the process than it was about the product. And it was more about the learning and having them talk about that. But one of the things we've been questioning is, how would we formally assess these? And so that's what I have to say about assessment so far. Emily, do you have anything else?
We're still working on the assessment part, but just doing that status of the class every time they went off to work too, they were really like, they knew exactly what they needed to do. When we said to them, what are you going to be working on today? They were like, oh, I need to work on inserting pictures, or I need to work on cleaning up my sentences. Or they were very, again, because we treated them, we empowered them, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Great, and I think just one other thing, Shawna, you had said that you were in 3 days a week, so I guess I'm just curious about how was that experience of co-teaching while taking care of this project?
Well, I mean, Emily will tell you that I have no balance in my life, and I pretty much eat, sleep, and breathe my teaching life, which is not something I would recommend, but, you know, I don't know, it just worked for us because Emily she is confident enough, and I feel like this work gave her a lot. I hope I'm not speaking too much for you, Emily, but I feel like it gave you a lot of confidence, and you could just see her whole affect change. And I feel like the little time that we had face-to-face time, we just used it way better because she was able to make decisions when I wasn't there, or we would contact each other via the Google Doc or via email. So it just worked for us.
And in this day and age of
Great.
testing.
Well, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, in this day and age of
sorry,
testing,
Emily, I didn't mean
it's
to.
exciting.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's about our time, but I really want to thank you for this presentation, and I'm sure all the viewers are very appreciative as well. There was some great learning that was going on here, and we look forward to more presentations from you in the future. And Shawna, I'll keep in mind that presentation that you had mentioned that you two will be presenting at later on.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks to the Educator Collaborative and to Ryan. We really appreciate your support, and all of our colleagues who are watching us from home. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
You too.
Okay, so just to conclude here, I just want to remind you of what is coming up next on this great day of professional development. So, if you take a look, what to look forward to in session 3, we have Tough Talks, having authentic conversations about race and diversity. That was workshop 11, workshop 11, workshop 12, which is about family engagement, literacy, workshop 13, which is about life beyond the group work drama, and actually my colleague Brian and I will be doing that one, so hopefully you can make it. And then finally, workshop 14 is every child acting as a mentor. And once again, if you enjoyed what you saw today and appreciated that it was completely free, please feel free to make a donation to the Book Love Foundation. And lastly, if you'd kind of like to follow along with what's going on today, you can follow the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering. And if you go to gathering.theeducatorcollaborative.com, you can watch all of these workshops, whether you can watch them live if you have the chance, or if you didn't have the chance to catch them live, you can always check them out later because they're all archived on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.